Welcome back, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Today we are continuing our First Crusade by Kings and Generals. We have the Siege of Mara. I think that's how you say it. Let's jump right in. Let's go.
Princes would collide and pull them in three separate directions. Until this point, Bohemond was the most battle-tested leader of the Crusade, but he decided to remain in Antioch as its ruler. But Raymond of Toulouse was so determined to prevent that outcome that he launched a campaign aimed at isolating and starving the city. He turned his gaze to the fertile Jabal as-Samak plateau.
So that quote-unquote civil war is very much still alive, but more or less not active battle.
Conquering the ancient city of Albara and capturing thousands in the process. The Provençals continued to believe that all taken lands should be returned to Alexios, but for the time being, they took control over the city, even appointing a Latin bishop, just so that their rivals didn't get their hands on the land. On November 23rd, 1019,
it says in the chapters Marat, but here it says Marat, so I'm not sure which one it is.
Raymond was joined by Robert of Flanders as they took the road to Marat-en-Numan, a strategic and wealthy settlement and the site of the humiliating Crusader defeat a few months prior. Bohemond recognized the danger of the Provençal exclave, so he quickly followed, reaching the city by the end of November. The city had none of the geographical advantages of Antioch.
Yeah, Antioch was like an anomaly for that.
However, it still had a formidable wall, surrounded by a dry moat. One Provençal eyewitness recalled, "The haughty citizens railed at our leaders, cursed our army, and desecrated crosses fixed to their walls to anger us. We were so enraged by the natives that we openly stormed the walls." This, however, proved to be a rash decision, since the Franks only brought 2 siege ladders that didn't even reach the top of the wall.
Yo, come on.
The 3 leaders then decided to encircle the city and starve it out, but by the end of the first week, their supplies were dwindling. One Latin eyewitness remarked, "It grieves me to report that in the ensuing famine, one could see more than 10,000 men scattered like cattle in the field, scratching and looking, trying to find grains of wheat, barley, beans, or any vegetable."
The First Crusade sounds horrible so far, by the way, to be a part of.
The Crusaders sent terms, but after they were rejected, a more aggressive strategy was adopted. They began filling the moat in multiple sections and digging underneath the walls. This was done under a constant barrage of stones, javelins, and hives of bees.
Hives of bees? That's a first.
Trees were cut down, and larger, sturdier ladders were built, alongside a formidable siege tower. The 4-wheeled siege engine was dragged towards the wall using iron hooks, while the defenders bombarded it with catapults and Greek fire. As knights began to climb the siege tower and fight on the walls, on the other side of town, another Provençal detachment climbed the ladders onto the walls, which were barely guarded, as the garrison focused on the main assault. Their success, however, nearly turned into a disaster, and according to the chroniclers, the ladder broke at once under the weight of the crowd who followed him. But nevertheless, he and some others succeeded in reaching the top of the wall. Those who had gone up cleared a space around them. Others found a fresh ladder and put it up quickly, and many knights and foot soldiers went up it at once. But the Saracens attacked them so fiercely, from the wall and from the ground, loosing arrows and fighting hand to hand with spears, that many of our men jumped off.
Okay.
The fierce fighting went on for hours as the Crusaders struggled for the ramparts. The intensity was too much for some, who jumped off the walls to their doom. Amidst the panic, as Crusaders were pouring in from multiple breaches, the sappers collapsed another section of the wall, completely breaking the will of the garrison. However, the fighting dragged on for hours, and only the night ended the fight, leaving some of the towers and parts of the city under Seljuk control. The logical thing to do was await the dawn, rather than risk the danger of urban warfare in the dark. The leaders agreed to wait, and the knights obeyed.
It sounds like someone's gonna not wait.
But the poorer Crusaders, still filled with adrenaline, couldn't stop now. A chronicler wrote, "Because starvation had made them desperate, they carried the fight to the besieged in the shades of the night. Thereby the poor gained the lion's share of booty and houses in Marat, while the knights who awaited the morning to enter found poor pickings.
I mean, early bird gets the
In
worm.
the morning, Burmore rounded up the city's aristocracy in one spot and stripped them of their possessions, while the brutal sack was in full swing. Eyewitnesses report, "Our men all entered the city, and each seized his own share of whatever goods he found in houses or cellars, and when it was dawn, they killed everyone, man or woman, whom they met in any place whatsoever. No corner of the town was clear of Saracen corpses, and one could scarcely go about the streets except by treading on their dead bodies."
Dang.
According to some Islamic chroniclers, this was the worst massacre in the entire First Crusade, including Antioch and Jerusalem.
We haven't got there yet, so.
Rumors began to spread that some locals escaped to underground caves beneath the city, so the Crusaders smoked them out and tortured them until they either revealed the hidden location of valuables or threw themselves into wells. Amidst the screams, the princes were at it again. Raymond did most of the heavy lifting in capturing the city, but Burmore, cunning as ever, instructed his men to occupy as many towers on the wall during the fighting as possible. Apparently, Burmore stated bluntly, "I shall agree to nothing with Raymond unless he cedes the Antiochene towers to me." Naturally, Raymond refused, and now each leader owned two halves of two different cities.
I mean, two halves make a whole.
As the turbulent 1098 came to a close, the spoils of war were exhausted, and the Crusade followers once again started discussing open mutiny. Raymond declared that he would be ready to commence the expedition in 2 weeks, eroding support for Burmore, who refused to go further before Easter.
And what happened to Godfrey? I guess he's chilling.
With resentment growing and his lines stretched thin, the Norman abandoned his foothold in the city and returned to Antioch, while Raymond convened another council, but this time in Rugia, his own domain. The first order of business was a last-ditch effort to resolve the Antioch dispute, which of course failed. But then, after taking the moral high ground, Raymond decided to buy the allegiance of his fellow princes. According to his chaplain, Raymond offered Godfrey and Robert of Normandy 10,000 solidi each, 6,000 to Robert of Flanders, 5,000 to Tancred, and considerable amounts to the rest, who refused. To Burmont's surprise, his nephew Tancred was among the many who took the deal, including Robert of Normandy. Robert of Flanders and Godfrey of Bouillon, on the other hand, refused. The crusade was now broken into 3 different armies, but at least it was now going somewhere. Raymond managed to attract notable leaders and their followers to his camp, but in the first week of January 1099, disaster struck once more. Back in Marat, starvation gripped the city as supply dwindled, and no words can truly paint the desperation and pain the Franks endured. Without guidance from their leaders, some Crusaders began doing the unthinkable. At first, the Muslim corpses were ripped open, since occasionally coins would be found in their entrails, but then the men began carving out pieces of flesh from the dead and devouring it, in some cases raw. While some partook in this act,
Raw?
others looked with disgust.
That's crazy.
This was an era of brutality and savagery. The very Bible these men read contained a code of war that allowed enslaving the entire population of a conquered city, and wholesale massacres and sacks were the norm. But even in this world, this infamous act was looked upon with disgust by every single chronicler we have access to. This act was so disgusting that it strangely had an incredibly beneficial effect for the Crusaders. Around the 7th of January, Marat itself declared open rebellion after their discovery that Raymond intended to hold the settlement, so the mob tore down the city walls stone by stone. This made the Count of Toulouse finally abandon his anti-Burmont crusade, and from then on he disavowed his territorial ambitions and made his way for Jerusalem. To show how committed he was, Raymond abandoned the city and led a religious procession where he walked barefooted in a simple robe, accompanied by his clerics. Once again, in an interesting plot twist, this show of piety now attracted many new followers, and morale was significantly boosted.
So they are way past Antioch at this point when it comes to not just ground beneath their feet, but also strength.
But even if his popularity made him the de facto leader of the Crusade, Godfrey and Robert of Flanders still remained in Antioch with their armies. As his army moved towards Jerusalem, another blessing in disguise was laid at his feet. The tale of cannibalism spread throughout the region like wildfire, coupled with the tales from the siege of Antioch, and many emirs pleaded for mercy, fearing that they would be submitted to cannibalism or worse.
So it worked in their favor as like a deterrence.
One by one, they sent delegations, gifts, and offers of submission. Banu Munkid, ruler of Shaizar, was the first to offer safe passage through his lands, as well as cheap food and horses. Once again, we see that, when approached in the right manner, the Crusaders were willing to bend their religious convictions. Their military capabilities, physical strength, and conviction in their cause was restored, an important milestone, which prevented the total collapse of the expedition. Next, the Franks found the town of Rafania abandoned by its denizens, but full of provisions. Raymond took his time and enjoyed his blessings, but held the rearguard, while Tancred and Robert of Normandy led the vanguard as it slowly advanced, hugging the coastline. On the 28th of January, the garrison of Hisn al-Akrad, a relatively small fortification placed exactly where the Crac de Chevalier stands today, launched a series of sorties and almost killed the leader of the crusade, but the vicious counterattack terrified the garrison, forcing them to leave the next day.
If they were to do that, though, that would have been... I don't know what would have happened. That would have been a power vacuum.
The fact that this strategic fortress fell was yet more news that paralyzed the region. Homs and Tripoli quickly confirmed their truce with generous gifts. In reality, Raymond led no more than 5,000 combatants, and his hope was that through action and piety he would inspire the rest to join him. But it was now February, and as the army neared Tripoli, there was no sign of the rest of the Crusaders. Frustrated and confused, Raymond decided to lay siege to the nearby fortress of Acre on the 14th of February 1099.
Is Arca like Acre? Acre? A-C-R-E?
Because the fortress had significant strategic value, but because the Emir of Tripoli offered him a large reward if they were to take it. Not to mention they had nothing better to do, so the Crusaders proceeded to make one of the worst mistakes of the expedition. One eyewitness attests, this castle was full of an immense horde of pagans, Turks, Saracens, Arabs, and Paulicans, who had made its fortifications exceedingly strong and defended themselves bravely. After encircling the city, Raymond dispatched two other Raymonds, Pilet and Turenne, with a small force aimed at taking the port town of Tortosa. But after they discovered how well defended it was, they decided to trick the garrison. Under the cover of darkness, they lit many fires, mimicking
pretending there's a bigger army.
A large camp. The defenders gazed upon the numerous lights and began to panic, many deciding to leave before dawn. In the morning, the Crusaders took the city without a fight, capturing valuable supplies and provisions.
Big brain, big brain, big brain.
The trickery worked, and it even forced another town, neighboring Marcab's, surrender. The Crusaders now had access to naval supplies, but Acre was still a day's march away. Back at the siege camp, the Crusaders struggled to make any progress against the stubborn defenders, who used projectile weapons to cause substantial casualties among the Latins. Two chroniclers, Pons of Palazzoun and Anselm of Ribemont, were both struck by a catapult and perished. The siege dragged on for 3 long months, with little progress, and as winter waned, an embassy from the Vizier of Fatimid Egypt, Al-Afdal, arrived. Following Kerbogha's defeat at Antioch,
I thought Jerusalem was Seljuk territory. Now it's showing Fatimid territory. When did that change?
The Fatimids attacked and took Jerusalem from the Seljuks in 1098, and soon after they were approached by Alexios, who not only revealed that the Crusaders were now off his leash, but detailed their dwindling numbers. Regional lords trembled at the sight of Crusader banners, but Al-Afdal could now call their bluff. His offer was simple, the division of all former Seljuk lands. Raymond loved the idea, but upon requesting Jerusalem, he was refused.
That's the one thing they care about, though.
The Fatimids were only interested in a truce, but still countered by allowing all pilgrims safe passage to the holy site. In an instant, the two natural allies became enemies, and Remor was well aware that he had a long road up ahead. Back at Antioch, Bohemond expelled all Provençal troops from their outposts and finally became the master of the city. But then an emissary from Remor arrived, detailing that a new army was assembling at Damascus, which would then march on his position and annihilate him. Despite their differences, Godfrey and Robert of Flanders couldn't let Remor perish, so they quickly left for Acre. Little did they know, this was either misinformation or a ploy to get them to join him. Either way, it worked. The Crusade was still missing Bohemond, but it was as united as it was ever going to get. But Remor spent too long and lost too many men to abandon Acre now, so the siege dragged on.
I'm guessing this is that city.
The Emir of Tripoli offered 15,000 gold pieces, alongside horses, mules, garments and yearly tribute, while the Emir of Jabala sent 5,000 gold pieces, horses and large amounts of wine. With so much wealth pouring in, some wondered if they should even take the city. For the first time in a while, the Crusaders were wealthy and well-fed. Why
Yeah, it looks like these guys are doing way better than Bohemond, unless Bohemond's doing better.
sacrifice the golden goose, considering the misery many of them had to go through? But as time passed on, some lesser Crusaders became greedy and started sending their own messengers to extract tribute of their own, to the point that the Emir of Tripoli was starting to wonder when this was going to end. In response, the Crusaders decided to launch a brutal raid against the city, slaughtering hundreds and choking the aqueduct with corpses. Then on the 5th of April 1099, Peter Bartholomew shook things up even more with another vision, this time featuring Christ, St. Peter and St. Andrew. Remor of Toulouse was to call forth the entire army and have them line up in battle formations. Peter would then, miraculously, find the Crusaders arrayed in 5 ranks. The Latins in the first 3 ranks would be devoted followers of Christ, but the remainder were those polluted by sins ranging from pride to cowardice. Peter actually came forward, saying that God had instructed him to oversee the immediate execution of any Crusader found wanting in this bizarre selection process.
This Peter guy is that same guy that claims to found the shroud and all that. He needs to be thrown off a cliff. He's just a horrible person. He's just a horrible person.
The camp was furious. The upstart prophet went too far, and now everything he ever said was called into question, including
the shroud, which I called immediately.
The Holy Lance. He was
Lance, not shroud.
Then publicly challenged and had to prove his innocence through an ordeal. Ordeals were a rare last resort measure in the medieval legal system, where the accused would have to hold a red-hot iron or place their hand in a boiling cauldron. If they were innocent, God would protect them, and the wounds would be free of any infection days later. However, Peter was fully convinced in his visions, and so he pleaded, "I not only wish, but I beg that you set ablaze a fire, and I shall take the ordeal of fire with the holy lance in my hands. And if it is really the Lord's lance, I shall emerge unsinged. But if it is a false lance, I shall be consumed by fire."
What happened?
After 4 days of fasting, the self-proclaimed prophet walked in front of a crowd of tens of thousands, bearing the holy lance. A group of bishops made 3 circles around the stacked wood, chanting, "If omnipotent God spoke to this man face to face, and if blessed Andrew showed him the holy lance while he kept vigil, let him walk through the fire unhurt. If it was a lie, let him burn, along with the lance he shall carry in his hand."
So will physics be physics?
Ironically, one of them was Peter the Hermit. Olive branches stacked 4 feet high, 13 feet in length, were now set ablaze, creating an inferno. A few arrows were fired at the rising pyre, but none came out on the other side. The crowd gasped as they watched the man walk through the fire and come out on the other side, his body seared from the blaze, flesh melting. After enduring 12 days of excruciating pain, Peter died, and...
Sorry for your earbuds if you're wearing earbuds. That is what we're talking about right there. That is what we're talking about right there. That makes me so happy. I don't care what you gotta say. That's the end of the video right there. That is just awesome. That is the greatest thing of this entire video. Fraud got found out. This guy caused so much hurt. He got so many people killed. He just blasphemy. He is taking a religion and just desecrating all over it while just lying to his entire people, trying to be something bigger than he's not. Thank God that this guy... That's all I got to say today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate it. We'll continue. And it looks like the next bit of this will be, well, it's pretty much the same thing. Looks like we'll be going into the siege of Jerusalem next. And the siege of Jerusalem is like the creme de la creme, the most important thing of this so far. I appreciate you guys watching. Thank you guys so much. Don't be like Peter of Bartholomew, who lies and then gets found out and then also lies and says, I'm going to be fine. And then guess what? Fire burns. And yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you. Have a good one. Bye-bye.